GloLocal is connecting local realities to global realities and understanding that they are intertwined, they are related, and that if you are going to identify and analyze problems that exist in the world today, that in order to resolve these problems, you have to have a kind of interrelated perspective between local realities and global realities. You could use it for analysis of societies, you could use it also for formulating policies and also for advocating for policies. You connect local actors with global actors and global actors with local actors, because the world, as they say, is becoming interconnected, and each day local news is global news and global news is local news. Well, it's very interesting how in my mind and in my life and practice this whole concept of GloLocal begun to emerge in my head. I think it happened over time. For example, when I was about 6 years old, my father had a business in Georgetown, Guyana, in South America. And he was in part of the independence struggle in Guyana in those days. And because the political party that was getting into power and was becoming popular was considered communist, the British invaded Guyana. And when the British invaded Guyana, they occupied our store. And they took my mother, and I went with my mother to our home. They were looking for subversive literature. So from very young, I sort of understood that in Guyanese politics, there was an international involvement. Here were British soldiers with guns occupying a country. So you could not administer your own affairs independent of the international, of the British, who were then the colonial masters of Guyana. That is one example. And then as I move on into life, my father gave me the vision that I should go, for example, before I went to Europe or North America to study, that I should get to know our neighbors, Brazil and Venezuela. So I went to Venezuela to study and begun to learn about Latin America, Mexico to Chile and the islands of the Caribbean. So in a way, I became internationalized as I pursued education. And not only in Venezuela, I was trained, for example, by an Argentinian guy who was my mentor. His name was Emilio Maspero. He was the head of a trade union Latin American organization. And he trained me with 2 generations of labor leaders from Mexico to Chile. So I got to know intimately countries, all the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. Well, when I think of GloLocal in a historical way and in my own life experience, it's fascinating. In Guyana, for example, we have several ethnic groups, and one of the group are the African people who were brought as slaves into Guyana. But in 1834, slavery was abolished. But if you look at the history of how slavery was abolished, not only did we have rebellions inside Guyana, but we had external support in Britain by abolitionists who supported the cause of the people who were fighting against slavery. And finally, slavery was abolished with a combination of external support and internal struggle. And then again, another group of people who were taken to Guyana were people from India. They were also taken from China and Madeira. But in the case of the Indians, they were also indentured laborers, and they suffered under a semi-slave situation. Interestingly enough, how did indentureship come to an end? And Indians became free of indentureship in Guyana. Because Mahatma Gandhi, when he started his struggle in South Africa, he had identified with the Indians in South Africa and realized that the overseas Indians were badly treated. So when he went back to India, he lobbied in the Congress Party to ensure that, that indentureship and the exportation of Indians overseas be brought to an end. And that happened in 1970. And in my own life experience, there was a dictatorship in Guyana, and I led a movement called the Democratic Labor Movement. and I campaigned for free and fair elections in Guyana. And for nearly 1 decade, from 1984 to 1992, I launched a campaign inside Guyana locally, in the plantations, in the cities and in the villages, going and holding meetings, little demonstrations and lobbying inside Guyana, protesting for free and fair elections. But then I realized that that was not enough, that you also had to have global support. So what I did is launch a national and international campaign for free and fair elections. And I went to all the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. I went to Canada and spoke to the Canadian Parliament. I came to the US Congress. I went to Europe in various countries. I went on a global campaign. And finally, we were able to get President Jimmy Carter, former President Jimmy Carter, to come to Guyana with the Carter Center and negotiate between the dictatorship and the united opposition. And in 1992, we finally got free and fair elections. So that is one fascinating example of a local activity that brought a new day of freedom into a country like Guyana. And I was a very important part of it, and I'm very, very proud of that. You should pay attention to GloLocal, and GloLocal should be looked at by everybody, because not only that experience in Guyana is an example. Here in Washington, D.C., I came here and I'm working with the University of District of Columbia. And one of the initiatives that I took was to work with the 4-H Club and with the Armory in Washington, D.C. We launched a project called the Green Line and Beyond. Because what did we realize? We realized that even though we were in the political capital, in inverted commas, of the world, because Washington, D.C. is like the political center of the world because of the power of the United States, that the people who lived around the White House did not know about the powerfulness of this city, the young people in particular. For example, people live in Ward 8, Ward 7, and different wards, young people. They don't go beyond the ward, beyond those borders. They have never been to the World Bank, the IMF, the Organization of American States. Some of them have not even been to the Congress or the White House. So what we did, I developed this concept of the Green Line and Beyond, because I used to work at an office that was on the Green Line. And I observed that on the Green Line in Washington, D.C., that the majority of the people that use it were black folks and Hispanic folks and a few white folks. So it occurred to me that it was important to go beyond the Green Line and meet the high school students and take them to see the World Bank, take them to see the IMF. And I used to go down every Saturday and teach. I teach them globalization literacy. And it was fascinating how the problems that are around the White House and around the Capitol are problems that are similar to the problems that people have in Africa, that they have in Asia, that they have in Europe, and that they have in South America and the Caribbean. There are similar problems of challenges in education, challenges in health, problems of drugs, problems of HIV, AIDS, all kinds of problems. But GloLocal, right here in Washington, D.C., around the White House, I made a contribution to connect high school students with the local realities within their world to the global city that they live in, which is Washington.